Hi, and welcome to the Brookdale Visiting Writers Series show. My name is Suzanne Parker, and I direct the Creative Writing Program and the Visiting Writers Series here at Brookdale. Today on our show, I am very excited to have on award-winning author Diana Goetsvh. Diana is the author of 8 books of poetry, most recently the book Nameless Boy and the award-winning In America. She is also a columnist and a nonfiction writer and spent a year writing a blog for American Scholar. Diana is a writing instructor and coach who lives in New York City and the founder and director of Jane Street Press. So Diana, happy to have you on the show.
Thank you. Happy to be here, Suzanne.
8 books of poetry. That's quite a while. That's a lot of books.
8 collections. Some are chapbooks.
That's 8 collections of poetry. It makes me think, and this is going to be one of those big questions, what was the impulse on that first book? What drove you to writing it? Do you remember?
I think my first book was like a lot of first books. Sort of collected what you've done so far over a fairly long arc compared to the second book. And they tend to be a lot of poets write their autobiography with their first book. And then it probably gets more interesting after that, after they've cleared their throat.
Yeah. At what point were you done clearing your throat, do you feel?
Oh, that's a good question. There were moments of clarity. I think somewhere toward the late 90s into the aughts.
Okay.
Certain poems, like when you see an anthology of poems, let's say someone has done 7 books and some press does an anthology, it's usually rear-weighted. It's usually weighted toward the more recent ones because you take a look back at those first collections and you're embarrassed.
In horror.
Yeah, and you say, okay, I have 1.5 poems from that first book that I would put in an anthology. Second book, okay, let's take 3 or 4, and then after it gets bigger and bigger because you've cleared your throat.
So we're putting together from your 8 collections a collected works, a selected works. How would you describe that arc, the evolution in your writing?
I don't know. I'm not sure. I think what I did was I learned to play. I think the first couple collections tended to be serious, and I was sweating something, and there'd be humor, but I was usually sweating something in the poems. I remember Mark Halliday wrote a blurb for me in one of those books. It's a book from 2004 called The Job of Being Everybody. And he wrote this really wonderful blurb. He's a wonderful writer. But then he sent a separate note in the email, and he just said, okay, so does it really have to be so bleak, for the next collection? Can we lighten up a little? But then he uses that book in his classes. He's my best customer. So, and I think I started to just play more. I started to do a lot more experimenting with, but actually not just playing with voice and with form, and I was just interested more in fitting the poem to the subject and having it perhaps be hard for the reader to tell that any 2 poems in a book were written by the same person.
Interesting. Did you find the poems became, I don't know if this is the right word for it, but kind of looking at your work a little bit looser? Not in the sense of craft, but like I want to take your poems out for a drink. Like there's such a strong presence, there's such a strong sense of voice in them, and they're quite welcoming. In contrast to a lot of poems that you read out there today. And I don't know, did you loosen up a little bit, I guess?
I think it was always pretty loose that way. I think I came from wanting to write prose. And then I discovered, no, I don't want to write prose. I want to have written prose.
What do you mean by that?
I wanted to have written a novel, or a short story or something, but I didn't like writing. I just wanted to have written. And then poetry was something I liked to do, but the whole time. But I think it was always very prose-like. From the beginning. I think we're hitting on that accessibility word. But the positive side of accessibility is the courage to be understood.
Yeah, absolutely.
I don't really care how accessible or not a poet is, as long as they're doing what's needed to be done, and they're doing what the subject demands of them. So I think I ramped up my meditation practice somewhere in the middle of this arc of books that we're talking about, and I think there was a lot of experience of space, and what started to happen on the page for me, like I always begin with a free write. My free writes just covered a lot more territory, and were able to extend way past any agenda that I had. And I just kind of learned to surprise myself a lot more. And the surprise is maybe what you didn't plan on, what's not you, but it's actually the deeper you.
So I wanted to ask you about your practice, because you do have, as you said, a long established practice. And how much that has influenced, I guess, can you parse out the difference between how that has influenced your process as a writer versus how, or if that has actually influenced the words on the page?
When you say a long practice, you mean meditation or writing?
Well, both in a way. I think they're really similar, but meditation, yeah.
Or
do you consider them the same thing?
Yeah, the same.
Yeah.
I think the spiritual path and the artistic path, in terms of what I see and how I do, I think they're the same. In both, you're putting the ego out of business.
What do you mean by that?
So, as a meditator, you let go and you let go, and you let go of your plans, you let go of your thoughts, you let go of your name, like you can't remember your name. Like you could if you wanted to, but you don't particularly remember your name. You're in this non-dual state. Some people call it the big space, big mind, the Japanese call it. It doesn't matter, but you're in this kind of space where it's very open, it's very free, and there's really no room for self-cherishing, and it's just too big for that, and you dissolve. I think it's the same for artists. When you're writing your best, dance, music, athletes in the zone, there's really no sense of self. There's a kind of a fluid dissolving into the situation, and you speak for the space. You feel the space. You feel into whatever that space is, the space of the subject, the space of your art, and there's no sense of self. And then when maybe you read it back to someone, like a first draft that's got some promise, and you read it back to a friend, and suddenly reading it back, you feel all kinds of emotion that you did not feel when you wrote it.
How important is, because that's interesting, you start with a free write, and is that simply to clear your head, or are you pulling poems from that?
It all comes from the free write.
Oh, it does? Okay.
It all comes from the free write for me. If I've got something, I'll just turn the page. If I don't, it'll just be an exercise. But, if something's happening, sometimes my free writes are really random. I think the best poem from that book you're holding, from Nameless Boy, might be the poem called Mexico. And that was a poem where there was a lot of construction around my apartment, and somebody has a writer's space called Paragraph Workspace in New York, and she said, here's the keys to Paragraph, go up there and write, we'll just let you write there. She was somebody I knew. And I get to the Paragraph space, and it's like hermetically sealed, like this studio. And okay, what am I going to write? It's suddenly quiet, like there's been crazy amount of noise at my corner in the village. And I decided to say, okay, I'm going to pick the 7th sheet of assignments I gave a class. I'm going to pick the 3rd one on the 7th sheet. I get each sheet has 5 assignments. And what I saw was the word Mexico. And so, you know, it's like improv. The rule is you just accept the assignment. And I just wrote. And it became this poem, you know, Mexico. And sometimes it'll morph and change and do a lot of other things. Sometimes I'll have a subject I've been chewing on, although I'll try not to develop it in my head at all. I'll wait for the writing.
Do you sit down when, it doesn't sound like, I would guess, with an intention when you're writing poetry? I want to write about this.
Maybe that's the only one, like the subject. Okay, I want to write about this. I mean, in my laptop, I have like pages and pages of a document with possible subjects. Just the other day, I wrote the most interesting noun I think I've thought of in a year, and the noun is the height of toilets. That's a very particular noun.
Yes.
It's abstract, but yet it has concrete tendencies, and the height of toilets. And then I gave that to a class. I said, okay, so there's 2 rules. Number 1 is your poem has to be about the height of toilets. And number 2 is it has to be heartbreaking. You know, what would that be like?
Yeah.
And so maybe someday I'll open up a book and write on that subject, you know, and try to...
I have a similar
whatever.
one about conchs, you know, the great shells, and that when they come to sexual maturity, eels find the special parts of conchs a delicacy. So when they finally have come to sexual maturity, eels will nibble on them during copulation. And I've, for years and years and years, tried to write a poem about that. I'm not sure why, but I just feel like there's something there. Partly because I just think nature is so wonderful and wild. But they come to sexual maturity very slowly. So they've been waiting and waiting.
The eels or the conchs?
No, the conchs. Yeah, and so so they get nibbled on during. They finally waited for ages for the special moment, and then the eels swarm and start nibbling away. Yeah.
That sounds brutal.
I know. Well, I'm going to take us out on a break on that note. But when we come back, I'm excited to talk to you about the new collection of poems. So I'm talking with Diana Goetsvh, and please join us after the break. Thanks. And we're up.
How long is our break?
Who knows? Who knows? A minute.
Is it a break for these guys or just for us?
No, they're just switching around.
Did we ever like have a malfunction and have the conversation all over again?
That's only happened once when I had a coughing fit. And it was with, do you know Michael Waters?
Of course.
Yeah. And it was Michael Waters, and he had this impish look on his eye because we had to come in on exactly the same word. And I forget what it was. And I was like, Michael, you have to talk. Because it was bronchitis. If I kept talking, I was going to have coughing fits again. And and I came back in and I was like, so how, because the first half of the sentence, they were coming right in. And he looks at me and just went, no. Or so he gets like, and I'm like, talk, Michael. And he's like, ah. And I was like, he had this little twinkle in his eye. And I was like, if I talk, I'll cough.
Michael has about the best sound in American poetry these days. He's a great sound poet. He is. Wonderful sonics.
Yeah, I think he's still abroad.
Is he? With
Mihail? I think she's on sabbatical, and he's abroad with her right now.
Somewhere in Slovenia or something?
Something like that, yeah. Yeah, his last semester off and away. Very jealous. God. Oh, you know what? I'm going to give you this so that you can have it to read.
I won't read Mexico because that's the other book.
Oh, you're welcome to. You're welcome to.
Does it
you want to
matter
read
if
that?
I'm planning on reading it tonight or not?
No, not at all. They're separate shows. Totally separate. If you want to read Mexico, go for it.
I'm going to read Bowie.
Okay.
I'll do that. Got it memorized so I won't mess it up anyway.
I do.
I've been performing with the Poetry Brothel. You know about this?
Oh, yeah. Oh,
so
cool.
a lot of these poems are memorized now because I performed them.
Oh, that's nice.
We had a whole Bowie brothel. I let it off.
Did you?
With my
That's
Bowie
cool.
poem.
All right. Ready? All right, I'm going to talk to the camera, and then I'm not going to ask immediately for the poem, so you're welcome to hold it, but just so you know. All right.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah. Yeah.
When I read the poem, am I looking there?
You can look at me.
Okay.
You can look at me. Yeah, is that correct? Yeah, just look at me. Yeah.
Okay.
I'll make careful listening faces.
3, 2.
Hi, and welcome back to the Brookdale Visiting Writers Series show. My name is Suzanne Parker, and I'm talking today with Diana Goetsvh, absolutely wonderful writer, most recently of the collection In America. So welcome back.
Thank you.
In an interview, and I'm not quite sure with whom, so my apologies for this, but you had said that you were basically, you realized, a poet of love.
Yeah, love poet.
Yeah, yeah. Can you speak about that?
Yeah, I think this was the Rattle interview.
I think so too, yeah.
I realized at a certain point that every poem I was writing was kind of a love poem, maybe with a few exceptions, but what could I redeem? What is the hardest thing in the world to redeem? Let's go there and see what I could do with it. And in a way, that's love poetry. But I also write a lot about just person-to-person romantic love. I find I'm just doing that a lot, and partly because I think it's the best challenge. I mean, it's really hard to write it's hard to get away with a love poem.
It is. Yeah, yeah.
So yeah.
Gotcha, gotcha. Your new book, collection, In America, which I believe won the Rattle.
Yeah, the Rattle gives a number of chapbook prizes,
Yes.
but yeah, so it was one of them.
Gotcha. Can you talk about that book?
So this book, well, when I won the prize, you always find out months after you sent it out. I'm thinking, okay, what did I send them? And so I went to my computer. I was really happy about the note, but I went to my computer and I just looked at the file I sent them. I'm thinking, okay, yeah, now I could live with this one. This is fine. This is going to be fine in a book. Because, sometimes after a few months you have second thoughts. But then when it started going through galleys and we started looking at it closely, I said, oh no, I more than like this book. I'm particularly happy with this book.
You often don't hear people saying that.
Yeah, no, this is the first book that has explicitly trans poems in it. And you always wonder if you care about craft and if you have standards that you try to hold yourself to in terms of, not just letting go with expressive content or lurid subject matter or, personal self-expression or whatever, that, you want to write poems that actually could matter to people who are very different from you, maybe at another time. And the challenge with, such specific poems, about a very small wedge of our population, very political topics, it tends to be, is can it not devolve into just, by us, for us? Can this poem pass the everybody test? Can it matter to, who's that great French philosopher? He wrote the, what is it? The Politics of Space. That's wrong. The Poetics of Space. And he said, he has a phrase called imaginations foreign to our own. I can't remember his name now.
Foucault?
No, it's not Foucault. He said other things. But can this be relevant to an imagination that's foreign to my own?
Oh, is it Gaston?
Gaston Bachelard.
Yes. I love that. I love the quote, though, as well. So were you aware of that when you were writing the poems? Of wanting, as you said, to speak to imaginations other than our own, roughly?
I mean, I want that every time out.
Yeah.
But, you get a poem, whenever poetry gets particularly graphic or lurid, or this is going to raise some hackles, or political, or something like that, I think the testing has to be more stringent. Because it's like, okay, it's going to be accused of being some kind of stance position poem. So I have to make sure it can outlive its day in terms of, whatever interest group or whatever political situation, and can it be art? And if it's art, it's probably also better politics as well. Like
Sure.
it's got a chance for someone on the other side, let's say, to say, okay, yeah, she's got a point there. Okay, I got to concede that one,
Yeah.
or just laugh or have an effect,
Yeah.
on an imagination foreign to my own. And so I've never seen this done with poetry about trans people. We really don't have much of a tradition.
Will you share a poem?
Yes. So I thought I would read this poem called Bowie. And it's kind of I think it's a trans poem. I think with Bowie, everyone thought, the critics would always ask him these questions in interviews about his sexuality. They were obsessed with Bowie's sexuality, and the fans knew they were dead wrong. He's playing with gender. This is not about sexual preference necessarily. He can play with that too, but he was playing with gender, and I knew that, as a kid too, looking at Bowie. Bowie. The first time I saw David Bowie, it was a man who took me to a cinema in Huntington, 12 miles from our town, where they were showing Ziggy Stardust and the Spiders from Mars, the concert film with backstage footage of Bowie during costume changes, talking with friends he obviously loved. He was young, with milky skin, as excited about the show as his audience, no matter how garish the makeup, how spiky the hair. He was, that is, an ordinary person saying, "Wow, isn't this a blast?" Saying what I would say. Soon he'd go back on stage in another skin-tight outfit. The crowd would spend half a song wondering where his dick was before surrendering again, singing along to that big voice as crisp and thrilling as sanity. He was so full of plain goodness, yet also a space alien, truly fierce, a little grotesque, though I knew he was nothing to be afraid of, for I was Ziggy Stardust too. Soon I'd go away to college, putting distance between me and the man who drove me to see Bowie. For a while, he wrote me letters mentioning other beautiful men. Richard Gere was on Broadway, playing a gay man in a concentration camp. The Nazis made him wear a pink triangle. And perhaps, his letter suggested, I might want to try on that triangle too. Did I tell you he was my 12th grade English teacher? His understanding of metaphor was quite limited, but I'm glad I at least got to Bowie, who was so far beyond gay or straight, a creature so wildly human, there was no word for him yet, which is why he needed another planet to be from, a planet I needed to find.
And that's a love poem.
I would say so.
It's wonderful. It's wonderful. And it's a wonderful collection as well, too.
Thank you.
Did you feel it was important to write specifically about your experience as a transgender woman, or to give voice to what is a very marginalized community?
I'm going to say no, only because I never have that kind of agenda. I mean, I knew it would come up, and if there was any agenda, it would be to never silence, never force down, never put a lid on. When you're ready to write it, you got to write it.
Gotcha.
What's that? Which chakra is the throat? Is that the 5th chakra?
I'm clueless about my chakras.
Once something gets to the throat chakra, it's over. It's got to come out one way or another. And with me, it'll probably be in poems.
But you also wrote this series of, I think it was longer than a year over the course of time, of kind of short essays and blog posts for the American Scholar.
Yeah, the column.
Yeah. Can you speak to that? Because that actually very much did speak about your transitioning.
Yeah, well, I was writing, so before I was out publicly, I was writing these letters. Like a friend said, "How are you?" Mm-hmm. It's my friend up in Vermont. And I gave a very complete answer. And then another friend in Philly said, "How are you?" And, as an email. And I found myself, well, wait a minute, I'm about to write the same thing I wrote the other friend. Why don't I just write this letter to a bunch of friends and be in touch with community? Because trans people isolate. I mean, we isolate even when it's dangerous to isolate. We do it. Nobody quite knows why. I mean, there's obvious reasons, but it's really, it's crazy how much trans people isolate. So I started to write a letter, and it was once a month. I limited myself to 1,000 words, just 2 or 3 topics. What is finally mattering? Because I didn't want to be that Christmas letter, that bloviating narcissist. So I imposed some discipline, and I said, "Tell me if it's spam. I don't want to bother anybody."
I remember that. I got those.
You got those? Oh, so you know those letters. So the American Scholar, they were corresponding with me on another subject, and they didn't know I was about to come out publicly. And Bob Wilson, the editor-in-chief of the American Scholar, he basically said, "When are you going to send us another piece?" Like, when the American Scholar tells you this, it's either a big mistake or a great honor. So I said, well, here's what I've been doing. And I picked one of the letters, because I know they're not ordinary letters. And I sent it to Bob Wilson. He goes, "You got any more of these?" And I sent him all 11. I'd been doing it for a year. And then he proposed a column. He said, "Why don't we," because he knew I was about to come out, that's in the letters.
Yeah.
And he says, "How would you like doing a blog?" And we did it. So I did it for several months. It's 31 essays. It's still archived there. And it all came out of, it's probably the most original writing project I've ever done. Yeah, easily the most original writing project I've ever done. And it all came out of this very organic communication that you received. We know each other.
And I think it's really, it was important to read. It was important for me to read. I urge people to check it out, because it is still archived there. And the blogs, I think of them as essays, are wonderful.
Yeah, they're essays, very much so.
Yeah, they are. It has been such a pleasure talking with you, Diana. And I urge people to get In America and Nameless Boy, and to check out the blog. And you've been watching the Visiting Writers Series show. If you'd like to know more about our classes or our series, please check us out. We are on Brookdale's website. And thanks for watching. Thank you.